Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time to talk Path of Exile. And in this video I want to tackle the trade manifesto that Grinding Gear Games produced. This is a while ago now. I think it was first put up so November the 3rd, 2017, exactly 18 months ago. And this was put out at a period where they made some small improvements to the trading experience, but that didn't really overhaul it in any major way. So they mentioned there that today's news post describes some minor changes to the Trade Online API that we've made, and mentions the beta launch of an official trade site, which has a similar feature set to community trade sites, but also supports non-English speaking users. And anyways, so that was designed to be read before the trade manifesto. However, by this point, everyone's used to the changes that were made then, so it's not particularly important to go and read the changes that were made then. So this manifesto post is for players who are interested in hearing more about our philosophy and reasoning behind trade and the direction of these changes. I will just make a quick heads up that this will be a podcast style format, so you don't need to be watching the screen to get to watch this video. You'll be able to just listen to it. So it starts out by saying that items matter and that trade's important. And basically they're saying that here that from the initial development design back around 2006, the founders of GGG identified several key design pillars. They're basically fundamental philosophies chosen to guide all of the design directions throughout development, and one of these was that items matter. Items are a player's reward for playing Path of Exile, the primary way of measuring progress in a league. And I think it's worth comparing this, for instance, to games like, say, World of Warcraft, where the difference between... I'm not sure what the level cap is in that game now, I think it's 120. The difference between a level 115 character and a level 120 character is out of sight, even if they were to use the same items. And in that sense, the primary way in which your character gets stronger in that game is by gaining experience levels. In Path of Exile, experience levels matter, and a lot of gear is gated behind levels, as are a number of higher level spell gems and things like that. But the actual power boost that you get for gaining a level of, I think it's 12 base life, something like 5 base mana, and 1 passive point. While this adds up, and there certainly is a big difference between a level 30 and a level 60 character, items are more fundamentally how you progress your character. And so a level 80 character that's decked out in impressive equipment will far outperform a level 95 that is using much weaker equipment than the level 80 character is. That 15 levels certainly helps close some of the gap, but the items will be decisive. This is also why if you play a second character in a league, you will be tremendously more powerful if you throw hand-me-down gear to that second character. So there's certainly something to experience in running a second character using a spell. Weapons don't scale quite as ridiculously, but when you've got Skin of the Loyal with a corruption that boosts skill gem levels as well, and so you can start out in the league with a +3 levels to your skill gem and all quality gems and a 6 link. It is massively more powerful than a first character that is going through those same zones, but is forced to use a 4 link for most of the leveling experience. So yeah, items are definitely the way that you progress, the primary means of progress, and gaining additional experience levels is a very secondary one, as are things like unlocking your Pantheon. All of these things, they're worth doing, but they don't hold a candle to items. So this remains true. And a person with vastly more in-game wealth often has played longer than someone with a higher level character. Yep, that's true. They also matter because if a player had better items, they'd be able to build more powerful characters, play harder content, and be viewed as richer and more successful within the game. The acquisition of items is why people play action RPGs, and chances are if you're reading this, you understand why it's important that items matter, because your Path of Exile items mean a lot to you as well. Yep, agree with all of this. For items to matter, it's important that they can be traded to other players. I broadly agree with this, although I do think it's worth noting that some other games, like again, taking World of Warcraft as an example, have very restrictive rules on what you can trade to other players. Generally speaking, in that game, once you equip an item, it can no longer be traded. There's exceptions, but broadly speaking, once you equip an item in that game, it is no longer able to be traded to other players. And Path of Exile has nothing like this, but it is worth saying that philosophy can work. Like, items can matter without being able to be traded. Likewise, some very, very niche crafts can be made in this game that there's pretty much no market for them. As one of the kings, if you're playing what people tend to term a hipster build, something that's just off the beaten path, that requires really unusual gear, then you may end up crafting items that there's simply no market for. One example I would raise of this possibly would be strength stacking so equipment that is focused around a strength stacking character. This can be the unique weapon Brutus's Lead Sprinkler, or it can be synthesized synthesized weapons with the implicit that gives. Trying to think what it is. It's a certain amount of fire damage for each 10 strength your character has, and then you can pick up other items that go alongside this, like synthesized amulets that have plus 15% to strength and give you 1% more damage for every 15 strength on your character. All this sort of stacking of an unusual attribute choice to stack ends up creating equipment that is generally not desired by other players because they have to build their entire character around it in order to benefit from it. And so, in this sense, items can matter that can't really be traded to other players. So there's a disagreement, but anyways, it's going further on. It says, it's important that you could give the item to another player if they were able to convince you into it. For this reason, almost nothing in Path of Exile is bound to your account. I'm just trying to think on this. There's been a number of things more recently that are account bound or character bound. I think one thing, for instance, is your progress on prophecy chains is something that's an example of a character bound thing. Your incursion temple is character bound. Your entire memory nexus is character bound, and probably most importantly, your delve mines are account bound within any given league. So there are things that, whilst we don't necessarily think of them as items, and like the delve mine is a major part of progression, there are things in the game, and probably more than at the time that the Trade Manifesto was written, that are bound to your character or account. Anyways, even in solo self-found mode, which doesn't allow trading, items can be moved at will into the regular trading leagues, so you can benefit from their value if desired. The ability to trade an item is a fundamental part of why people enjoy playing PoE. If you're lucky, you can find amazing stuff that you can trade for all the items needed to create an entire new character build. And yeah, this is true. Like, there's a few people every league that are not sort of major Path of Economy type players that will come across a Mirror of Calandra drop or a massive Watcher's Eye that's got, 3 perfect anger mods or something like that. And these end up being a staggering amount of currency for that player that then sets them up. They can go and they can build a character that's based around Headhunter and get outstanding gear in all the other equipment slots as well. Anyways, so broadly speaking, the first section on items mattering and trade being important, I broadly agree with everything that's said in the manifesto there. Now, the next part is the consequences of easy trade. So given that we love trade and we feel it's critical to PoE's formula, why is there so much debate about trade in the game? Most of it stems around whether trade should be easy or not. And while easy trade sounds great on paper, there are some important considerations. So let's unpack this. When they're talking about ease of trade, I generally interpret this to mean the more player time that is required to be invested into a given trade for the transaction to happen, the less easy the trade is. So ultimately, trading in a sense it's easy in the sense that there's no challenge to actually carrying out the transaction. We're talking about the nuisance factor, the time delay that's involved. So let's go through the things that are mentioned here. Firstly, easy trade reduces the number of times a character improves their items. And GGG's argument: people who are heavily engaged in trade perform fewer item upgrades to achieve their final build. They get there in fewer steps because they can easily buy items that are close to what they need. Simply put, the character progression is more about trading than it is about getting items from monsters. We believe it is more fun to slowly and iteratively upgrade a character over time, and have a longer journey to gear a character up. Knowing that a monster could drop something that improves your character is a great motivator for playing that one more level. Now, so let's talk about this. I think there's a couple of factors in why people don't upgrade items as often as you might think. And I want to take the example of my approach to body armor on life characters when I'm leveling at the start of a league. Energy shield items are different. Energy shield I tend to respec into when I'm in maps. So let's just assume that you're playing a build that always wants to be a life build. My general progression goes from using using no body armor up to about Act 3, because body armor has a hidden effect that slows you down. And the best races go longer than Act 3 without body armor, but I tend to pick it up around there. At that point, I'll start looking for 4 links that are in the right colors, and I won't really care about the stats. So, if I have just some armor evasion piece that drops, that, is, say I want double red, double green, and it's already double red, double green, I'll grab that, I'll use it as a white item, or I'll hit it with an alchemy orb, or more commonly a bad essence. Just an essence that I don't care about, one of the low level ones. That's my default approach to get through the early acts. And then as I'm continuing to level, let's say in Act 5 I see another double red, double green chest piece, I'll throw another essence on it and see if it's better than what I had. I'll continue doing this all the way through to Katava. And then at that point, my next step up is usually to go for a 6-link, via one of the divination cards. I made a whole video on my strategies for getting a 6-link early in a league. And at this point, I can either, as I say, farm one of the divination cards, or I can purchase the divination cards from other players that have had them drop for them, or I can, when people run the Eternal Labyrinth, they'll often, fairly often, they'll get 6-link items with bad stats that are corrupted. And then I'll keep looking out for 6 links with stats that are okay, and if one of them pops up, I'll trade for that. Now that's a big jump in power, from going from a 4-link with whatever rubbish stats to a craftable 6-link if I go a divination card route, or a corrupt 6-link that already has 6 affixes on it. Not necessarily good affixes, but 6 of them on it, and the right colors already. I will then use that item, that chest armor, I will then use that until I'm ready to purchase a multiple exalt upgrade, which might be a 6-link unique item, which I may just get a unique item and then 6-link it. Do you notice here that I'm not doing very many upgrades here? And I think the main reason for this is that the expense of preparing an item that I find, let's say I find a rare item that's got very compelling stats on it. So let's say that I'm in a tier 3 map, it's just right at the start of a league, and a piece of chest armor drops that has 88 life, 41 fire resistance, 42 cold resistance, 17% lightning resistance, so it's not a great stat, but it adds up to 100. This is a really solid piece of armor. I'm also not going to use it because the cost of bringing that into a usable state by using Jeweler's Orbs and Fusing Orbs is so much higher, and then actually Chromatics as well, that is so much higher than the cost of just purchasing a 6-link that already exists. So in this case, the barrier is not the nuisance factor of trading. The barrier is the requirement to color and socket and link the item. So I think this is entirely, well, it's not entirely wrong, but it's close to wrong, this section of the Trade Manifesto. Easy Trade would allow you to purchase, like for instance, purchase 5-link unique items that other players have sort of outgrown. So, you know, say that someone gets into maps and then has a, what's the name of that chest? Kingsguard, I believe it's called. One of the unique items that drops all the time in maps that is sort of okay. It's good enough to use, but you also quickly outgrow it. They've had that drop, and then they decide, all right, well, I'm going to use this for a bit, so I'm going to 5-link it. No, I wouldn't make that decision myself, but people do it, or maybe they got a Jeweler's Touch Prophecy and decide, oh, yep, I'll use that on the Kingsguard. And then at that point, you then can purchase this item off them once they outgrow it. So they use it, then they sell it because they've had their, their main armor that they were chasing. Maybe they wanted Belly of the Beast, and they've had a Belly of the Beast drop, and so they're like, okay, I've now outgrown this armor. I wasted a bit of currency making it a 5-link. I'm going to recoup some of that by selling it. I generally don't even look for 5 links of unique items as an intermediate stepping stone, because they're such a pain in the ass to trade for at the moment. So I actually think that I personally would upgrade items more often if the trade system was smoother. However, the primary barrier to upgrading frequently is linking and socketing items, which honestly is a system I'm pretty happy with the socket system generally, but it has a very serious consequence here. And even on items that aren't particularly expensive to link and socket, I think again, like say for instance helmets, it is still a very real barrier to have to go and spend an average of something like 10 jewelers and 10 fusings to make your helmet usable. That's several chaos. It's easier just to skip that step by buying one that's already 4-linked. Okay, so easy trade means reducing drop rates. Compared to hypothetical games, in the first game, trade is very difficult. Majority of items that can't be used by your character are not traded to other people. In the second game, trade is very easy. Most of the items that you can't use are traded to other players for items that you can. In the second game, because of trade, you have a much higher acquisition rate of useful items. Well, that sounds great if you want instant gratification. In reality, it means that the second game either receives reduced drop rates relative to the first, or ends up being a whole lot easier and less challenging to achieve goals in. I agree with this mostly. However, this would be the thing is that with the higher end items, players do tend to either sell those, like assuming that you recognize an item is high value. So let's say that you're not intending to play Winter Orb in the current league, but you're on top of the you're on top of the values of various enchants. You take your synthesized Hubris Circlet with plus 30 energy shield into the Eternal Labyrinth. You get to the end and you get the Dream enchant of Winter Orb has an additional 2 stages on it. You're now, whether you know it or whether you know that you're sitting on a 50 Exalt item or not, you're immediately going to recognize this is an extraordinarily good item. I can't use it. I'm going to try to sell it to someone that can. Or maybe you build another character around it. That's the other possibility that some people do. So this is the way that this is how you as a player would then react to getting that very good item. You're pretty much always putting it on the market. And that's the case now with trade being clunky. Other players can definitely find that if they try to search for it. They will find that via the various trade aggregators. And if if they think 50 exalts is a fair price for it, then they'll buy it at that price. Maybe you don't sell it at 50, maybe you end up dropping it to 35 and getting an instant sale from someone. Or alternately, maybe you don't recognize the value, but you still know it's a meta enchanted helm, and you put it up for sale at 15 exalts and it's gone before you can click. So for the very top items, I don't think this really applies. The time that this does apply is when there are items that are extremely niche and that players don't recognize the value of what they're sitting on. And then in that case, they may not put them on the market. But at the moment, if you put something on the market, people will find it. So we've already sort of, even with the current trade system we've got of high friction trading, actually does already ensure that the very good items are generally circulated to players that can use them, or alternately, they rot in the stash of someone that wants too much for them. Next up, easy trade would make the disparity between different players too great. Both the above points are even worse when you consider the level of engagement with trade varies substantially from player to player. Most players who play PoE never trade. Out of the players who do trade, most only complete a few trades in a league. The subset of players who regularly trade strongly overlaps with our core Reddit and forum communities. Chances are, if you're reading this, then you're one of the top 10% players in terms of engagement with advanced systems, and the difference in magnitude of trading, and hence item acquisition and progress, between non and low traders and heavy traders is gigantic. While a regular player would be lucky to accumulate a small handful of exalted orbs in a league, a trader may reach hundreds in the same time frame. This enables them to fully gear Shaper-capable characters while the non-trader is still in mid-tier maps or lower. And of course, this was written at a time where Shaper was the end boss, and Shaper at the time that this trade manifesto was written, Shaper was about as difficult to beat as Uber Elder is today. And that's just been power creep that's made it so that that Uber Elder is now only about as difficult as Shaper was back then. The significant differences in character power and player progression caused by trade has already created a situation where Path of Exile is very hard for some players and quite easy for others. Some people never stand a chance of seeing some of the Atlas of Worlds content, while others can rather quickly defeat it and are looking for new challenges. We're tentatively okay with the degree to which this occurs currently, but it would be much worse if trading were made substantially easier. Again, I think by the time players are considering even Shaper tier today, even sort of getting to the Shaper tier of content, much less Uber Elder, most players probably are already trading and they're picking up exceptionally good items via trade. So I think in a lot of ways I don't really agree with this point. Players that sort of engage very casually with the game, and here I'm talking about players that perhaps have not yet completed the Eternal Labyrinth and feel that that would be a major challenge for them to get to that point, which I think is generally where players that are somewhat disengaged from the more power gamer community, where I think they generally tend to fall in terms of experience. Now these players, they don't trade, but it's interesting to note that they make a lot of build mistakes as well, and those build mistakes probably actually matter more than their ability to trade. You'll find, for instance, that there'll be casual players that will run Atsuri at some point, will pick up the flask, maybe they'll recognize that it's a very powerful item, and they'll put it on, but they'll do it on a character that is unable to do chaos damage for whatever reason. So for instance, you may be using Elemental Hit and the skill Elemental Hit and Atsuri's Promise. These do not work together at all. Elemental Hit prevents you from dealing non-elemental damage, so you gain absolutely nothing. It's Atsuri's Promise is just an Amethyst Flask on those builds. So build mistakes, I think, are a bigger source of disparity than trading is. There are, however, some things that I'll get to with consumables because when we're not talking about items, but we're talking about consumables, there are actually some strategies where this disparity will widen. So let's discuss those now. I'm just going to bring up the PoE.Ninja trade aggregation website, and let's have a look at one of the hot button items in Path of Exile community at the moment is the price of Sulfite Scarabs. You'll notice here that that it's 80 Chaos Orbs in Synthesis League for Gilded Sulfite Scarabs, and 60 for Rusted, with Polish somewhere in between. Now, this is a question. The reason for this is something that I think is quite interesting. Premium consumables in the game, so talking things like Gilded Scarabs, Monstrous Treasure Prophecies, and the like, their prices are dictated by obviously what people are willing, what the power gamers are willing to buy them for. And so power gamers will make decisions based upon how much return they expect to get from using these premium consumables. So Gilded Sulfite Scarabs they're being bought at 80 Chaos. Now there's two main factors for this. The smaller one is players looking to complete the endgame grinds challenge, which requires reaching depth 600 in the Azurite mines. That is a very big investment of Sulfite Scarabs to reach, to reach depth 600. But the number of people that are even attempting that is very small. There is no way that you would attempt the endgame grinds challenge unless you were someone that firstly is confident you can reach level 100, because that's one of the other grinds in there, and it's one of the ones that's getting done a fair bit. And two, you're capable of defeating the monsters in those deep delves. Generally speaking, you're going to be someone that's running a cup that will run many thousands of maps if you're going for that. While you're running many thousands of maps, you'll be meeting Nico a lot at random anyway, and so you will pick up a lot of Sulfite. And so for that reason, I think that the amount that the challenges impact the price of Scarabs is overstated. What it is people that are fairly deep in the delves, this can be anywhere in the 400s and up, that buy up Sulfite because they just go into the mines, they run a few delves, they know how to find fractured walls, and they come out with a haul of loot that on average is considerably more than the cost of a Sulfite Scarab. That's after they use, the 8,000 Sulfite that you get from a Gilded Scarab roughly, or the 6,000 you get from a Rusted, or the 7,000 from a Polished. They'll go into the mines, and they will then come out with enough enough loot and currency and fossils and the like that they're pretty confident that they will on average get considerably more back than their 60 to 80 Chaos investment. Not necessarily every single Scarab will get that, but on average over time. And that's the same with Monstrous Treasure, which is a borderline garbage prophecy if you're not a power gamer and you're not stacking it with Scarabs. But when you're stacking, with Scarabs and with so things like Gilded Divination Scarab and the Sextant mod that quintuples the amount of loot that comes out of monsters that are inside a strongbox. Likewise, you'd be using them on Elder or Shaper maps. That's influence there, and ones that have premium divination cards in them. All of this gets you the best return possible out of premium consumables like Gilded Divination Scarabs, like Monstrous Treasure Prophecies and the like, and then that sets a cap on the amount that power gamers are willing to pay, but that cap is much higher than the value that a non-power gamer would get out of those items. So one concern I'd have about easy trade is that if these premium consumables became tradable, they would go up in price if it was much easier to buy Gilded Sulfite Scarabs, if it was much easier to buy Monstrous Treasure Prophecies, because more people, there's a whole section of players that know about high investment mapping strategies, and their attitude is, fuck that, I can't be bothered with all the trading. If you remove that section, then those items will go up in price. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because, like, particularly monstrous treasure prophecies are something that casual players earn through just through natural gameplay. So, in that sense, I think it's an interesting one. There would be serious repercussions on the game economy, but I don't think they're necessarily bad ones. Next up, going back to the development manifesto now. Easy trade allows for greater abuse by automation. So talking players that are cheating here. Another topic is automation. While we work hard to stamp out bots and abusive behaviour, it would be hard to completely eliminate the damage caused by a few trade bots with access to a fast trade system. If they had the ability to search out and buy items without having to talk to another player, there would be some very large-scale economic consequences that would not be good for regular players. Now I want to talk about a couple of things that people have hypothesized here. So, first up, hypothetical, and I can talk with a bit of authority on this because I play EVE Online as well, which is a game with very low friction trading, and I do some of these things there. First up, imagine someone tries to conduct a buyout on Sacrifice at Midnight fragments, particularly if the League had a challenge that required killing Atsuri many times, like the old endgame grind to kill Atsuri 100 times that was in several leagues. I think around the Harbinger era. I'm not sure it was exactly Harbinger, but the easiest endgame grind at that point was to go and kill Atsuri 100 times. Anyways, in this case, a targeted buyout on Sacrifice at Midnight fragments would fail badly. The reason for this is that they're a consumable that can be created not deterministically by the players, but somewhat deterministically by players running their other Sacrifice fragments into the map device. If the price of Sacrifice at Midnight was pushed to, say, 8 Chaos, suddenly people would start doing that a lot. So you'd have the buyout there'd be a countervailing pressure towards players trying out a different type of gameplay to fit the arbitrage niche that would open up, where you could convert your Sacrifice at Dawn, Sacrifice at Noon, Sacrifice at Dusk fragments into Sacrifice at Midnights by running them in the map device. So that's my first example where I think that wouldn't work. Secondly, the ratio of Chaos Orbs to Exalted Orbs. It's always a hot button topic, and actually something I need to make a video on at some point as to why the price of Exalts as to why the Chaos to Exalt ratio varies throughout a league. But and because it's very predictable, to be honest. You can set your watch almost by how it works. Synthesis was a bit later than usual for the Exalts to spike up in price, but they did, as they always do. A targeted buyout of Exalts would be impossible, even by players with extremely, extremely deep pockets. What tends to happen is that if you were to start buying every Exalt on the market, then players that have Exalts sitting in their stash would start listing them at higher and higher prices. So let's say, having a quick look at the current price of Exalted Orbs, because it changes every day. Oh wow, they're down to 143.6. Anyways, let's just check how deep that demand is as well, or that supply is. We've got our usual jerks putting prices at ridiculously low in order to trick people, but it looks like there's a deep supply at 144. Actually, not all that deep though. There's not that many unless there's people with large stacks there. There's 32, but that guy doesn't look like he's so much cheaper than everyone else that I don't think he's actually selling for. 25. We've got a fair number of people with reasonable stocks at 144. So I'm going to call 144 the real price here. So what's going to happen is that if someone were to try and buy every Exalted Orb under 152 Chaos, with a view of then reselling them at a higher price for profit later. There's a whole lot of people like myself that will notice, because I've got a couple of dozen Exalts that aren't on the market at the moment, that will notice this happening and will then go, oh, okay, I'm going to post all of mine at 154. And the player that's done the big buy-up is then in a bind. They can double down on the buy-up by buying up my stock, at least the ones that I list, and then open themselves up to getting burnt really badly because they're suddenly paying a higher price, and they're not going to be able to keep stockpiling and buying forever. So that's one option they've got. The other one is to just accept that they've made a loss and resell all the Exalts they've got at, one Chaos Orb below what I'm selling them at. There are ways that you can carry out a sharp buy-up of items in an online game that has easy trading. And the time that you do it, and this is something I do a lot in EVE Online, is when you believe that there is a fundamental reason that that item is underpriced at the time. To give you an example from EVE Online, there were some major changes to one of the main consumable items that pretty much everything in the game is built out of a few patches ago, where there was an entire week that was announced quite a while in advance. There was going to be an entire week where what's called Moon Goo was not going to be available for players to acquire via any means, and there'd be a major supply disruption as a result. My approach here was to look at items, final products that players use a lot of in day-to-day play that required a lot of Moon Goo to produce them, and then I went and did major buy-ups of these items. And the numbers aren't going to mean anything unless you're familiar with EVE, but the ratios will give you a sense. Adaptive Invulnerability Field 2 is an item that in EVE Online that's used a lot. It's basically, it's the budget. It's the best of the budget items for improving your ship's shield. And I went and I bought, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 of them at prices between 2.2 million ISK and 2.6 million ISK. I then waited until the actual week in which the Moon Goo wasn't available, and suddenly it was much more expensive for any other players to create these items, and then I went and I sold them all for 3 million plus. So there's a big increase that took place. What happened there was I correctly predicted that because of game mechanic changes, these items would get more expensive, and then I used the fact that trade was so frictionless in the game to go, okay, I'm buying them all. The way that a player would abuse easy trade would be to pick a particular consumable that is very rare and that is not able to be target farmed in any way. I would target something like Hollow Fossils if I was rich, or Monstrous Treasure Prophecies, or if I was less rich, I'd probably target some of the various scarabs possibly, and not Gilders, not Sulfite though. Sulfite's too expensive and also too deep a supply because players go out of their way to make them. And so I would then buy up all of these at a time that I believe that there's going to be an increase in general demand across the economy. The thing is that to some extent, players already do this. Players have learned that on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4 of a league, you should be buying Exalted Orbs, or, I would recommend other items actually that go up more than Exalted Orbs. Things like Fractions of a Headhunter, so Fiend, Divination cards, Doctor Divination cards, Nurse Divination cards, Fractions of a Mirror, so this is 7 Years Bad Luck Divination card, the Immortal Divination card, Mirror Shards, things like that. Those are the items that I would buy instead of Exalted Orbs. But anyways, like, people already do buy Exalted Orbs aggressively days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of a league. So this is already happening. It would be smoother and it would be faster, and the effects of a game change would propagate throughout the economy more quickly with easier trade. However, this isn't automation, this is actual players that aren't cheating. When we talk about players that are using cheat programs that do exist at the moment, I think one of the things that's really, really striking about the current state of trade is that the overwhelming majority of comments about trade bots on the PoE subreddit, so these are people who are cheating, these are people who are outright cheating, using a bot program to cheat in the game, to run currency exchange bot services basically all day. Probably being that they're cheating, they're probably linked to some of the unsavory side of Path of Exile, like the various pay-to-cheat websites that sell currency in-game for real-world money. Don't use these, by the way. No one likes players that cheat. But the overwhelming attitude towards the currency trade bots on the PoE subreddit is support for them. People will say that they're performing a useful service and that they're fixing up the problems in the game. I think it is a very bad thing that the trade system is so dysfunctional that it makes people regard outright cheating as a positive thing. Anyways, that's all I've got on the automation side of things. So I'll just quickly summarize that section, that the community fears about targeted buy-ups are misplaced. That, however, the effect of smoother trade, more frictionless trade, would be to increase the demand for basically for any of the premium consumables that are fundamentally seriously undersupplied in the economy. So this is scarabs, this is monstrous treasure prophecies, and the like. They would go up considerably in demand for them, which would then push the prices up unless the increased demand and increased prices result in more people target farming those items. Which for scarabs you can't really do that effectively. I mean, you can to some extent, but there's a limit to how much you can do it. So anyways, trade in Path of Exile. This section is a bit of a history about how trading got to where it is today. It's not that important today, so I'm just going to skip over that entirely. Except to say that GGG to some extent regret allowing the current market aggregation websites to exist. They made some decisions not understanding that would lead to the trade aggregation websites. Most notably, it was being able to link your items in the forums that made that happen. Anyways, they then decided that was the status quo, and that they then introduced premium stash tabs as a way to basically interact with that. So, this discussion of the trade market, which is this is the Chinese version of the game, which runs a trade market rather than the API system that we have, API and websites. And the way that it works is that the trade market takes the opposite approach, apparently, where it's hard to find the item you want, but very easy to complete trades. And so you can, basically, you have much less of an ability to filter options, and then you can find the item that you want to make. And in any case, they're saying that they don't intend to bring that to the main version. There's some discussion then of solo self-found, which is, basically just as I'm concerned, it's just an optional hard mode. It's no different to having to playing the game on hardcore, or to playing the game with private league mods that, say for instance, give -40 to your character's resists. It's just an optional hard mode that people can opt into if they like it, and if they do, great. If they don't, that's fine. I've never really gone for solo self-found. I can certainly understand the appeal though for ensuring the integrity of major races. In any case, there's a number of changes that are then mentioned, which is just saying that they've brought in the PoE pathofexile.com/trade, which the time that it launched was terrible, but is now pretty good. But the final point that they make is that the goal of our trade site isn't to fundamentally change how trade works, it's just to provide an alternative to other community sites for players that want options or that use a language other than English. So it wasn't intended to change anything, just to be something that didn't require you to put in an unusual or an unusual website that was outside GGG's control. And there's always a bit of a danger with a site that starts out as a community resource. All it takes is for it to get sold to the wrong person, and suddenly you can wind up with malware, with someone, malicious actor, injecting malware into thousands of Path of Exile players' game clients. So that's never happened with any of the fan sites that I'm aware of, but I have certainly heard of things like that in other games. In any case, the one thing that's really missing, that's really telling when you reread the Trade Manifesto now, is that it doesn't mention minor consumables really at all. I think that most people's biggest concern with trade isn't the experience of trading for something like let's just take a good example here, helmet with an enchant on it. Let's just look up the best enchant in the game, which is the Winter Orb one. And let's just pick something that's one of the big... so something like this phenomenal synthesized hubris circlet that someone's put it up as, well, they've posted it at 8 Mirror of Kalandra, which might be a little bit ambitious, but in any case, it's going to be a very, very profitable investment for someone, because you've got you've got all this additional energy shield and intelligence. It's basically perfect thing for running a fractured fossil service on. I don't think you'll ever find a better one. And you're not just running a fractured fossil service, but selling your mirrored copies at 15, 20 exalts, because they'll be amazingly powerful. In any case, if you are in the market for something incredible like this, then the actual act of searching for it and carrying out the trade is not some onerous task. The onerous part is accumulating the requisite currency. And let's take one that's priced a bit lower, but still is very much a premium item. Let's having a look for one that's actually exceptionally good. I think some of these may be fairly ambitious prices. So this is a Shaper Winter Orb Hubris with Abyssal Socket. Yeah, I mean, this is a really strong item. I'm not sure it'll sell at 70 exalts, but it certainly is a very, very potent, very, very potent one. And again, acquiring 70 exalts, or even if you were able to talk the seller down to 50, acquiring 50 exalts to buy this item is going to be quite the effort. That's going to take a lot of effort to accumulate that currency, and the very small amount of effort that's involved in going through the process of negotiating terms of the trade and then carrying out the transaction, that's going to be pretty trivial in comparison to the effort that goes into accumulating all of that currency. However, when you're talking smaller trades, let's go to the ones that really get people's goats. Imagine that you're starting the league late, you're in, or maybe you're just not someone that plays very fast, and you decide that you want to go and get a Mesa map, because you've got to get it on your you've got to get it done on your Atlas at some point. And you're having a look here, and you've got all these people. I'll bet you start sending tells to these people, and most of them will not answer. Because they just aren't interested in getting 3 chisels at this point, in getting a transaction for 3 chisels at this point of a league. I'm not picking out this guy, he may very well be willing to do that, and especially because he's got a few of them. This is the biggest concern people have with the current status quo of trading, It's picking up the low-end consumables. So that you need just one of here, one of there. So maps are a good example of this. Low-end prophecies are another really good example. If we have a look at the Fire from the Sky prophecy, and here we go. This is listed as 1.9 chaos. Now you've got a whole lot of different people that are selling them for 2 chaos, but they're selling, here's this guy with 1, here's this guy with 2, here's this guy with 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now at a higher price, you've got one person with 3. If you wanted to acquire 100 Fire from the Sky prophecies to use in a very long mapping session, that is going to be it is always a really onerous task. Divination cards are another really great example of this, and I'll use the bulk item exchange for this example. Cards, Arrogance of the Vaal. I traded for dozens of these for a video earlier. This is absolutely horrible. So you can see here that they're sort of 3, 4, or 5 chaos, but people have got 1, they've got 2. No one's got big stacks of this card. Well, except for this guy that's got a fairly ambitious price of 34 chaos per card. It is an absolute nightmare to pick up these, to pick up fiddly cards like this in any sort of large quantity. And I just, really did not enjoy at all my experience buying 77 of them to go with the 3 I'd looted myself for the video that I made where I turned in 10 sets of them early in the league. I then was intending to buy another 20 sets and only ended up getting 5 done because it was just so... The experience is just so unpleasant. So all of these low-end consumables, fossils being another one. Not so much talking about the big fossils. You're pretty happy to, talk to someone there. That's fine. But if you're trying to buy bulk enchanted fossils, bulk dense fossils, bulk quantities of, say, etheric or perfect or encrusted fossils, it's just a downright miserable experience. And these are items that are essences again. I was purchasing Deafening Essences of Rage at one point, which I see are finally starting to go up in price now. Sort of always thought that they should have been more expensive than they were. I was trying to buy these for a whole period of time, and oh my god, it was horrible. I was very happy to get this, to get my craft done with only 4 of them. So all of this is just going to say that there's a lot of items that I think the concerns that GGG's development manifesto on trade discuss about item upgrade speed and item upgrade frequency, that these don't really apply to at all. I would love to see a situation where we're able to have perhaps a completely automated system for transacting maps and a completely automated system for transacting essences, currency from currency conversions, and really this is the thing that the people who cheat using bots are doing already. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the trade manifesto. I think that generally the limiting trading on items isn't the worst thing in the world, but when I'm talking items as in equipable items, because you only get 15 gear slots if we count 10 equipable items plus 5 flasks, plus maybe 7 jewel slots, so you've only got 22 items to pick up. It's not some onerous experience to engage with trade 22 times for that, as you're picking up items on your character as it currently is. But it is much more onerous if you're going to be acquiring essences, acquiring divination cards, all these sorts of things. The last thing that I want to say about the status quo is bad actors. How much the status quo of trade assists bad actors in the game. And again, let's demonstrate this with a divination card. I believe it will be have a look at this. So the Immortal Divination card is correctly priced. That the current price of a Mirror of Kalandra is about 150 exalts in Synthesis. This is 1/90th there of a mirror. Therefore, you would expect its price to be somewhere around 1.65 exalts. Obviously, the fact that you've got to go through the hassle of multi-part trade means that they'll be a little bit less than that. What do we get when we search for House of Mirrors? The very first person is listing it at 1.1 exalts. This person I already know without clicking, without even trying, that if you were to send this person a message trying to buy this, they will not respond. And the whole idea of this, the reason that this post exists, is not to sell an item, but it is to mislead other players that happen to come across a House of Mirrors card. It is to mislead them into believing that the item is worth less than it actually is. So they then undercut this. They might then list their House of Mirrors at 1 exalt or at 1.1 exalts themselves. And then this person or one of their alts will then send them a tell saying, hey, I want to buy it straight away. This sort of intentionally deceptive order is something that in the real world, there's pretty strict laws against this. I'm in Australia. Our two main supermarkets are Coles and Woolworths. And if, for instance, like you could imagine, like this would get whichever supermarket did it into a lot of legal trouble if they did it. You'd imagine, say, Coles advertising, we're selling milk for 80 cents a litre. Normal price is $1 or $1.10 here. We're selling milk for 80 cents a litre. But then you go into Coles intending to buy, do your shopping and buy milk while you're there, and you find out, haha, sucked in. No, it's $1.20 now. This would actually be highly illegal. So would be having a huge display that you can't access of the milk that's at 80 cents, and you just can't actually take it out of the fridge. You can't grab it. You can't do anything with it. And this would be something that you'd then have, if Coles were to do that, Woolworths would then jump on their throat and launch lawsuits and all sorts of things like that. But of course, in the game, you don't have any of that sort of any sort of real world consumer protection or laws or anti. Guess this is not really collusion. It's just general laws about fairness in trade and contracts and the like. And so you'll have this scenario where these completely and obvious fake listings get posted. There's no consequences for the players posting them, and it's very difficult to actually inflict consequences on them, because doing so will then just punish players that are legitimate players but that happen to go AFK. Like, you posted an item with all the intention in the world of trading it, but nature calls, you run off to the loo, and by the time you come back, 16 people have sent you tells asking to buy it, and you've ignored all of them because you were doing your business on the loo. So the reason that this gets done a lot is because it works. It's a very lucrative way for bad actors to make a lot of currency out, basically to extract currency from new players by abusing their lack of knowledge of the market through dishonesty. And as I say, this is rewarded, this works. And this is because of the nature of the current trade system. I would really like to see that actually get completely and utterly shut down somehow, but it's a very difficult situation to work out how to do. At least with the current way that trading is set up in the game. So basically, I think that the current trade system has a lot of very serious flaws. I'm sympathetic to some extent to arguments around upgrade frequency being a problem if trade was much higher. However, I don't agree with a lot of GGG's other analysis in this document. and I think that fundamentally the game experience suffers from players having to go through the hell of trading. Lastly, there's another really bad thing with with trade, and that is that you just have to have so many third-party websites. The best site for trading fractured items at the moment is GGG's own website, trade website. The best site for trading, but the best site for various other trades is the poe.trade website, particularly if you want to set up buy orders for items. So that's where you say, let's say you're wanting to buy enchanted fossils and you're willing to pay 62 chaos for 5 of them, was the price the last time I was doing them. So I think they were generally going for 12 chaos, but I wanted to offer more, if a little bit more, if I was getting a lot of them at once. So I'd go to poe.trade and then set up a buy order there. Someone else then sees that and then sends me a message saying, hey, I'd like to buy your 62 chaos orbs for my 5 enchanted fossils. So fractured items, you're using the GGG site. Buy orders, you're using the poe.trade. poe.ninja for information. poeapp.com for map transactions. It's a mess. You get to know all of these different sites when you do a lot of trade, but if you don't do a lot of trade, you end up at a huge disadvantage because you're then trying to pick up, for instance, maps from players via the GGG website is terrible. Let's just demonstrate that now by looking up some map that. Why is Burial Chambers exploding in price there? Do I have any to sell? But let's say you're looking up a pit map, and yeah, there's lots of people with them, and they're selling them for 2 elks, 2 chisels, whatever. But good luck getting onto any of these people. So if you're using the wrong site for the wrong task, you'll end up just being really disappointed. Anyways, that ended up being a very long video, longer than I was expecting, but I think it covers all of my thoughts in depth on the current trading system. Basically, as much as GGG like to say it's not broken, it is, and some sort of fix is needed badly. I would personally be happy with a map, fragment, and scarab and map, fragment, scarab, and currency automated trading system, and it could have some friction built into it in the sense of giving you a delay on receiving the proceeds of sales from it. I'd be happy with that. I think fossils should be in it as well, and essences. So there's a bunch of things, but really something should be different to what we've got at the moment. Anyways, that's all I've got. Have a good one.